Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Let's move on and welcome back to the programme our next guest. He is a terrific guy. Love having him on. It's been a while since he was on. I want to mention straight up that he's the organiser and the host of Anarchapulco. That's Anarchapulco, which takes place in Acapulco, Mexico between February 25th and 28th. It is the world's first and certainly the biggest anarcho-capitalist conference, February 25th to 28th. And you just have to go to anarchapulco.com. Don't worry about the spelling. I'm going to tweet it now. That's anarchapulco.com. He's a libertarian. He's a broadcaster. He's an author. By the way, check out Shemitah Trends, a second edition, The Plot to Enslave Humanity and How to Find Freedom. That book available at all good online retailers. Let's welcome back to the programme our old friend Jeff Berwick. Jeff, you're very welcome. How are you?
Good, Richie. How are you doing?
I'm very well, and thanks for not putting the camera on. Last time we spoke, I think it might have been in the spring, miserable here, and you had the camera on. I could see the waves, I could see the palm trees, and it pissed me right off for about a week, Jeff. So thanks for not doing that. It's great to chat with you, mate. I guess you're really busy right now.
Oh, yeah. Always busy, but extra busy, as you mentioned, the conference coming up in about a month here in Acapulco. We actually have more than one conference. We have an Acapulco, and then the Dollar Vigilante has its own one-day summit. And, of course, everything going on with Trump. I've been busy ever since Trump got selected back in November. It's just been a whirlwind of things going on that we need to cover.
Brilliant. Now, G. Edward Griffin, Jeffrey Tucker, Adam Kokesh, your good self, Larkin Rose, Luke Radowski, Lauren Southern, Julia Turiansky. I could go on. The great Max Egan, of course. You've got an absolutely terrific lineup of speakers there. Anarchapulco.com. Check it out, folks. Jeff, we heard today, our news bulletin, which we broadcast at the top of every hour, they said the Donald is planning on very early on, in fact, in the small hours maybe even of Saturday morning, the day after, the night before, when he is Mr. President, ripping up the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. Do you believe this, and why is this a good thing?
Well, I really don't know what to believe with Trump. That's why it's going to be so interesting in the coming days, because he's said so many things, and a lot of the things he said has been conflicting. So we're going to find out what he's really going to do fairly soon now. So that's good. I've said about Trump that he gives off more mixed signals than a quarterback with Tourette's. He's like the first Twitter-based president, and he's just tweeting at all hours of the day and night, all kinds of crazy stuff. You don't know he could actually start wars on Twitter now, which kind of, scary to some extent. But we'll really see what's going to happen now. I know he's talked about being against those so-called free trade deals. Of course, they're not free trade deals. A true free trade deal would be one sentence long. It would say the people in these two countries are allowed to trade freely without any taxes or regulations or tariffs. But obviously these so-called free trade deals are literally phone books that you're not even allowed to see. So these are obviously massive corporatist scams. So he has talked out against them. So we'll see what he does. Hopefully he does get rid of them. It looks like he is. And if he does, that's great. And, I'll support him on anything he does to move towards more freedom. And we'll see what happens.
Absolutely right. The Twitter war thing that you cracked a joke about there, it's hilarious. But it's serious too, isn't it? I mean, we've never seen anything like it. I've been covering news and current affairs for a long time. And, I've always said, and I did promise Jeff today, because we've already had tweets from people saying it's great fun when Richie and Jeff get together. But listen, I'm not going to be jumping in talking about free market capitalism. I'm not going to do that today, because I get to have my say all the time, and I've got to be more aware of that. And I don't want to go down that road anyway. But Jeff, you're right. I don't think anything is black and white. I think the house always wins in politics anyway. Ultimately, I believe that. But maybe this guy, I don't believe maybe he's the real deal, but maybe he won't be as easy to control as maybe previous, stooges and puppets have been. And maybe that Twitter craziness that we see is some indication that he might hold certain truths he might be very sincere about certain things, and that some little bit of good might come out of this guy. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's possible, but I'm sort of with you in that I believe that all this stuff is mostly all scripted. He's selected. I actually said that Trump would win because I started to recognize that the elites had chosen him to be selected. He was actually speaking at a major Jesuit function with Hillary Clinton just days before the election. So they had already brought him into the club. The Jesuits are one of the most nefarious organizations for controlling things behind the scenes. They do all sorts of things. They that's a big part of this whole democracy sort of scam in the beginning is you have these 4 or 8 year periods and they'll do so many crazy things. And of course, we had Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama, who had 8 years straight without one day of peace, drone bombing country after country, dropping thousands of bombs every year. And so I think they just push it as far as they can to the point where when someone else comes along, everyone's just so relieved. They're like, okay, this guy's got to be somehow somewhat better. And it never is. And they'll always say all kinds of things, all kinds of platitudes. Like even when Barack Obama came in, he said he was going to stop all the wars. He was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay. He obviously did none of that. He's exactly the same as Bush. Everything that Trump has said that he really he hasn't said he wants to change anything really important. He hasn't said he wants to actually shut down the Federal Reserve. He said maybe they'll audit it, but really there's no point in auditing it. We know exactly what it does. It's a scam. It needs just to be shut down. I doubt he'll ever do that. If he does that, and that's the other thing, if he does sort of try to do some real things, he'll probably get JFK'd. So this is going to be very interesting to see what happens.
You know, Paul Craig Roberts, the former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, who pops into the programme fairly regularly, agrees with you wholeheartedly, Jeff. He agrees with that if there was any real authenticity to the guy about these big issues, he wouldn't be long for the world. So what about this? And listen, I was being kind of, devil's advocate earlier on. I got it wrong. I believed that the elites had chosen Hillary. I didn't see the light as you did right up until the event, right up until the day I was saying, look, I believe it's, a foregone conclusion. But I've begun to think that I fell for something maybe I should have seen through, and that he was always the chosen one. So I agree with that. Now, on what Paul Craig Roberts is saying, this whole CIA row, Jeff, we're supposed to believe at the moment that there is a major, unprecedented, never before seen standoff between the president-elect, who will be the president this time tomorrow, and the CIA over hacking, which we believe was leaking by DNC staffers. We don't believe the Russians did it. Not that they're angels, but we don't believe they did it. So is this a contrived bit of theatre again, Jeff, this alleged standoff between the intelligence agencies and Trump? Are we being played for fools?
Yeah, it's really tricky to see and to tell what's really going on. For the most part, everything is staged when it comes to that level of the U.S. government and politics. People in the U.S. need to recognize they're all slaves. Slavery did not end 200 years ago. They just made everyone slaves now, and that's exactly the case. So Trump doesn't want to shut down the Federal Reserve. He definitely doesn't talk about shutting down the IRS. And so those are the only important things that you need to shut down if you want to free the people. So as far as the CIA thing goes, it is very interesting. There might be a bit of an infighting going on. There might be a bit of a control play going on between people that are with Trump and the real globalist types. It is possible that Trump is trying to move away from the globalists somewhat. I doubt it, but it's possible. And if it is possible, and if it is happening, there's going to be some very interesting things happening. We even saw one of those senators was on the mainstream media, or fake news, as I call it, in the U.S., and basically warning Trump that if he went against the CIA, they have 6 different ways from Sunday to get him. So there's threats being thrown out there right in public about these sort of things. I think the only thing that we can do at this point is just watch and see what happens. There definitely could be some sort of control play going on. There might be some players trying to play around, but I don't think any of it is really of any benefit to the people as a whole. This is just a power play for who gets to control the people, not for who actually wants to free the people. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope Trump is the savior. I hope he is going to try to shut down the federal government as much as possible, to shut down most of these unbelievable agencies. to get rid of all of the corruption, all of the graft, all of the everything to do with the government, get rid of it all. But I doubt it. He said he was going to drain the swamp, but it looks like he's been mostly refilling it with just the same old sort of people. He's got some new faces in there, but there's a lot of Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all the same sort of people, all the same scumbags. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be very interesting. I can understand men and women in cities where manufacturing has disappeared. Intelligent men and women, but not women and men with qualifications, so they depend on manufacturing. When they hear him say things like, we'll make it more difficult for people to buy cars from overseas and I'm going to kickstart the motor industry, I can understand why there is unbridled joy. And today, Jeff, one of Sky News's most prominent anchors is a guy called Adam Bolton, is in the States and he's covering the inauguration. And he was in the heartland, Jeff, and he was meeting people that depend on skilled or low skilled or semi-skilled jobs. And they really believe him and they're really excited, Jeff. And my heart, and I'm not, I'm not a soppy guy. I'm not a guy who gets emotional very easily. But my heart was kind of breaking for them because they've believed this, right? Loads and loads of new automobile factories are going to open and they're not, Jeff, are they? It's not going to happen.
Well, it actually could happen to an extent, but it won't actually be of any great benefit to most people. It'll be a benefit to a few people who work in those factories, but all these protectionist policies actually destroy the economy. That's actually one of the reasons the U.S. was quite very, very wealthy for a long period of time and quite free, was because they didn't have all these sort of things. So the people in the U.S. had the ability to take all of the best things from the rest of the world and get the cheapest and the best products because they weren't being actually taxed and tariffed and all these sort of things. When you do that, you actually really more and more destroy the economy. So, you have a lot of these people who are sort of more poor or lower middle class, those sort of people, and they're complaining a lot about how they can't afford anything anymore. And so they want the minimum wage to go up. Well, the minimum wage, the reason that they can't afford anything anymore is because the central bank is printing so much money that is causing the price of everything to rise, and the wages can't keep up with that. So they need to go after the Federal Reserve, go after the central banking system. But instead, a lot of them fall for the same old government stuff. Oh, the government will help by shutting it down or making it cost more. So all Trump's really doing or saying here is he's going to make things much more expensive to buy in the U.S. That's all he's saying by saying that, because he's saying, oh, well, if someone wants to bring in cars, it's going to cost 30% more. Well, cars are now going to cost 30% more in the U.S. How is that going to work out for a lot of people? So these things are not actual real great solutions. They're sort of populist measures that some people think is going to help them. But as usual, the thing that they think is going to help them is actually going to hurt them. It
is, yeah. And this might be surprising you now. Not that we didn't agree on a lot before, but we argued quite a bit about things. But I see exactly where you're coming from there. And when these people were speaking to camera in the Vox Pops today, they weren't considering the fact that these factories would be heavily automated anyway, wouldn't they, Jeff? I mean, they just would be. And, you're not guaranteed to get 10, 15,000 people into a big plant. They would automate those. But on the protectionist stuff, I see both sides of that argument. I can understand why people who, at the base level say, well, why can't we make things in our country? Why do we import things that we might be able to make here and create jobs? Now, I know that sounds very simplistic, and I know it's not simplistic. Things are more complicated than that. But, years ago, Jeff, and I've said this a few times on the programme, this guaranteed Irish label we used to have on Irish goods, it was like a symbol in the form of a G, but it wasn't an obvious G, but it was a label, a trademark, guaranteed Irish. And back in the day, in the recession in the late 70s, we were encouraged, I was only a child then, buy things that are Irish. It would ultimately help stimulate things in Ireland. What's wrong with that at its base level? Buying American?
Well, there's nothing technically wrong if you want to personally buy things that are made by people in your area, but by actually enforcing through violence, which is government, that people have to buy certain things in certain areas. And if other people try to trade, you're actually just screwing up the free market system. And the free market system, when allowed to operate, is the best system for the greater good of all people. So it keeps the prices low by doing that. But once you start to slow it down or stop it or stop the movement of labor even, which is another thing that government does, all you do is increase prices and things like that and just make it harder and harder. So a lot of these people who want jobs, for example, actually no one should ever really want a job. We should want that we have so much wealth that we don't need a job. And the way to do that is through the free market. But because we've had so much government and central banks now for like a century, this Federal Reserve has been around since 1913. It literally makes almost everyone have to just keep running and running and running just to pay the bills. So what people really need to do is wake up and realize that it's the central banks and it's the government with all their taxes and regulations and bureaucracy that is actually impoverishing everyone, and try to get rid of those things. And then we'll have so much more prosperity, no one would even believe it.
Jeff Berwick is on the line, folks. Go to anarchapulco.com. The conference between February 25th and 28th in the wonderful Acapulco in Mexico, which I've never been to. I was in Central America before, but never Mexico. Amazing lineup of speakers there over the 4 days. Wonderful world-class resort and some really, really exciting thinkers going to be speaking there. Anarchapulco.com. Jeff Berwick is on the line. Of course, that's where, you just hit the nail on the head, Jeff. When central banks are loaning money into existence and not creating the interest, we're condemned to forever be in this debt cycle that increases and increases and increases. The free movement of labour, some of our listeners will undoubtedly want me to take you up on that. They will say, right, okay, I understand where Jeff is coming from. But if you look at the European problems at the moment, we have unfettered migration moving into Europe because of the manufactured crises in Syria and elsewhere, and that just drives down wages. It certainly puts a big. Now again, I'm putting listeners' points of view. I have some sympathy with these. Others, I disagree. I agree, and I change my mind as much as I change my underwear. But on this one, I understand that when you allow unfettered immigration and you allow people coming from economies or countries where the economies are not competing, they're not earning as well, they come into a country like the European, like the United Kingdom, and they drive down wages, Jeff. That's what that does, doesn't it? It drives wages down.
Yeah, absolutely. You really can't have the free movement of labor if you're going to have these big governments that have all these social security safety nets and things like that, because that's exactly what happens, as you pointed out. That's why you have to get rid of all those things. Those things cause way more problems than they ever solve. So you just get rid of all those things and go to a free market. If we had a truly free market in the entire world, you wouldn't see massive amounts of people just moving on a whim. Most people really just kind of like living where they live. Most people I know, even Canadians or Americans, they just stay in Canada their whole life or stay in the U.S. their whole life. They just like being around where they grew up. And those are the same with people in Syria and the same with people in Libya. The problem is that people in Libya and Syria are under the massive terrorist attacks by the North Atlantic terrorist organization NATO and the U.S. Department of Defense, and they are literally having to run and flee from those areas because of those massive attacks. And it's actually all been done on purpose. You can actually look into it.
Absolutely.
They actually put most of these refugees into Turkey and held them until about September of last year, and then they just unleashed them into the European Union to cause chaos. This is all on purpose, all to destabilize things, all to make it so people ask the government for more, to do more things, to lock down more freedom, get rid of more freedom because of all these refugees that are all of a sudden flowing in for no apparent reason at all. It was actually all planned. So yeah, these things get really messy, and it's really kind of difficult for a lot of people to understand what's going on. Even myself, I don't know everything that's going on, but I know a lot of it. But if we could get to a real free market system, the actual free movement of capital and free movement of labor would not be an issue at all. It's just in this really warped, horrible central banking, big socialist sort of government, big government sort of systems that it causes a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's you could say, as David says, communist, fascist dictatorship. That's what, well, I can speak obviously from experience of the European Union. I've got to bring up, by the way, it's 29 minutes to the top of the hour. Jeff's going to stay with us for another 15, 20 minutes. Loads of comments. I will get to them shortly. Loads of tweets there. Jeff, you'd have been, I'm guessing you'd have been surprised, maybe not surprised, but maybe happy with the decision that the voters of the United Kingdom made when they decided to leave what I would call again the fascist dictatorship of the European Union. How have you read that, Jeff? What happened there? And what do you make of all the wrangling at the moment in terms of all of this? Because the government would deny this, but there's definitely a big stalling going on while they try and figure a way out of actually honouring what the people have chosen, which is to leave the European Union. It looks on the one hand like they're desperate to get out and leave the single market and all of that nonsense. But really, I know better than that. I know that they're working their way towards maybe late next year or 2019, another referendum. How have you read all of that? What have you made of it?
Yeah, I was quite surprised when Brexit won. I was expecting Brexit to not win because they usually rig these elections completely. I believe Scotland, the Scotland referendum was totally rigged. Many of the other sort of secessionist movements were rigged in the past. So I was expecting Brexit to be rigged as well. This is something interesting, and this is something related to Trump as well. And this is why I started to realize why they might let Trump in, is the elites are actually starting to lose a lot of control. Their mainstream media propaganda channels, their fake news, is really just no one's watching it anymore, and no one believes it anymore. I think it has less than 10% of people in the U.S. actually think it's honest, real information on the mainstream media anymore. So they're losing a lot of control. And because thanks to the internet and thanks to shows like yours and many other people putting out real information out there, they're losing control. So I think if they rigged once again Brexit, and if they rigged Trump, because there was a lot of, there obviously never met one person who actually liked or wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton. So if she won and if Brexit lost, then I think a lot of people would be like, okay, this is all rigged, and then they might actually go out into the streets and do something. So I think what they decided was, okay, let's let them win. And so with Brexit, they're like, let them win. But then we just really won't do anything. So Brexit, as you pointed out, that one, what was it, like more than 6 months ago now, or was it last year? I don't even remember.
No, you're right. You're right. It was June 23rd, 2016. So we're approaching 7 months, and they haven't triggered Article 50. In fact, there's a Supreme Court decision pending next Tuesday morning, which will decide whether or not they have to get parliamentary approval before triggering Article 50. I mean, this is tyrannical. The Parliament themselves voted to have the referendum. So the MPs voted to have the referendum, and they said that it would be binding, and that leaving the European Union meant leaving the single market. Now we have a situation where private citizens, although very dodgy people indeed, were able to challenge this decision at the Supreme Court late last year and say, well, she can't now just trigger Article 50. She must get parliamentary approval. It's a nonsense. But we're going to find out probably on Tuesday morning that she does have to get parliamentary approval. And she even said herself, Jeff, Theresa May the other day, that any deal that she comes to, or any agreement she comes to with the European Union, that in itself later on would have to get parliamentary approval. It ain't going to happen, Jeff.
Yeah, that's my impression, is that it's probably not going to happen. They'll just keep going over this for years and years until people just sort of give up caring about it and then just keep moving on. They might actually sort of break up the European Union to some extent. That actually is possible, but it'll be under their terms, under the elite's terms. It won't be under anything that anyone votes for or anything like that. They just might switch up how they do things. But yeah, that's my impression with Brexit, is that they probably weren't going to move forward with it very much. And it's the same with Trump. I think, this is the same thing that we have with every new president that comes in. There's always this little bit of hope that they're going to be different, right? And I brought that up earlier. And I remember when Barack Obama came in, there was so many people just thought the world, was saved. The savior had come. And what happened? Absolutely nothing. In fact, he ramped up the war effort. And what happened? Because he was sort of this nice-talking Democrat, all of a sudden the anti-war Democrats or anti-war left just disappeared for the last 8 years. So he just went on bombing just as much or more than George W. Bush, and no one cared anymore. And so I think with Trump coming in, a lot of the people who were kind of against all these things that Obama was doing, like Obamacare and all that sort of stuff, Trump probably won't change much. He actually has already said that. He's already backed off most of the things he said he was going to do. He said he was going to get rid of Obamacare. He's totally backed off on that now. He said he was going to put up a wall on the Mexican border and make Mexico pay for it. And now he's like, maybe it'll be a fence on some parts. Everything that he said. He said he's going to put Hillary Clinton in jail as soon as he got elected. Oh, they're nice people. He's been friends with them for decades. So, I think it's just putting in a new face, sort of like Brexit. Let the people think they won so they get back to work and paying their taxes and not trying to change anything, and let them think they won. But I don't think anything really big's going to change with either one of them.
24 minutes to the top of the hour. Anarchapulco.com. Jeff Berwick, check him out. Also, our friend, of course, is known as the Dollar Vigilante. He's on the line to us, and we're talking about the inauguration of Donald Trump, Brexit, what's really going on with these things. Loads of tweets came in. I'm going to read just a few of them quickly, and then we'll move on. Hubert says that in the late 70s, he was told he had a job for life at Ellesmere Port car factories. Within 5 years, most people were sacked and replaced by robots. Martin tweets, there is no free market, it's a stitch up. Banks lend money as it doesn't exist, credit and charge interest on it, fraudulent. There is no free market, Martin says. Presumably, like Jeff, he would like to see a genuine free market. Loads of interest in this as well. Faisal says, centralised corruption affects the real economy much more than the free market against or versus protectionism policies there. It's at Richie Allen Show, Richie at richieallen.co.uk. Jeff Berwick stays with us. You see, Jeff, do you think you and I agree on what Trump is and who put him there? But do you think that something good that might come out of this is many of these people who, as you said, have now begun to see through the corporate media owned by the tiny amount of massive corporations, because they've seen through that, when Trump becomes, when it becomes apparent to them is that Trump is screwing them just as bad as the previous guy, do you think rather than just get disenfranchised and sick and tired, that they actually won't, Jeff, that they'll actually begin to do something? Do you think this might be the tipping point when this guy lets them down? I'm always saying this because I'm like you. I don't believe in any of them. I've never voted for any of them, even here, even in Ireland. When this guy becomes what they believed he wasn't, rather than just disappear and go away quietly, people might take up arms now, but they might start to make themselves known and their voices heard. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think thanks to the internet that people are waking up. So I think after 2008, 2012 with Ron Paul, there was a lot of people who were really behind Ron Paul. Ron Paul was sort of the more libertarian, almost anarchist sort of guys who wanted to shut down pretty much everything the federal government did. He had a massive support. He was truly run out of the election. He would have easily won. He was filling stadiums as big as Trump, or actually way bigger than Trump. So people woke up after that, and then of course now we've had what's happened with Hillary Clinton actually totally just railroading Bernie Sanders, totally just rigged the DNC election, and actually got totally caught doing it, and then said it was the Russians who caught her doing it. So then it's okay. It's weird now. Now we have to bomb Russia. So a lot of people saw that. So you have a lot of people on the left now who were sort of Bernie Sanders supporters. They were sort of like the Ron Paul supporters of 2008, 2012, saying this whole system is just a scam. It's all rigged. We're going to see a totally different style president come in for the first time really ever. There's really never been anyone like Trump before. And I'm sure he's going to do tons of crazy, horrible things. That's just what governments do, and that will wake people up as well. And you're already seeing a huge backlash from all these sort of leftists that don't want them, and they're actually talking about seceding. California, for example, wants to secede. Not as an anarchist, I'm always like, if at first you don't secede, try again. I want to see as many things secede as possible until we get to 7 billion governments on Earth. And so, there's a ton going on. This is actually a fascinating and amazing time to be alive, to see all this happening. We're seeing all the old power structures all collapsing. And it's really what happens now and what we end up replacing them with. And hopefully it's really nothing. Hopefully it's just the free market. If we end up replacing all these old power systems, the central banks, the big governments, with true free market, we'll have peace and prosperity on Earth like we've never known it. The other way that it could go, though, especially if they're going to try to cause World War III over it all, which they're already talking about and positioning for, is it could go to complete tyranny. So we're really at a crossroads for humanity in the next few years. There's a ton of reason to be optimistic, and that's why coming to a thing like an Acapulco is really uplifting. You can see all the people creating all these new systems for the free market so that we can get rid of the old systems. But if we don't go that way, we could end up in complete, absolute tyranny in the coming years, with everything NSA, everything being spied upon, everything being taxed, all of us being rammed into the taxation and banking system, which is bankrupt, with negative interest rates, all of us being impoverished, complete police state watching over us. It could be just terrible.
It'd be terrible. Bail-ins, of course. Kevin Randolph, Kevin is in the US. If Trump doesn't follow through with most of his promises, as the people that voted for him will have his arse, says Kevin Randolph. Now, Mark Atwood tweets me to ask, what does Jeff think about white dragons / new control over the financial system? Are the cabal being removed?
I know what this person's saying about white dragons, but I've never looked into it too much. It seems really like fantasy, like fiction novel sort of stuff. And I've never seen any evidence of it. But I think there is, like I just said, I think the globalists are losing control right now. That's why John Kerry said a few years ago, he said this little thing called the internet is making it really hard to govern. And it is. And they're losing control. People are starting to wake up. The thing that people don't understand yet is what the solution is. So a lot of those people who are some of your listeners, Richie, they're like, well, we have to keep people out so we keep our jobs and all this sort of stuff. They don't understand that free market economics will actually improve everyone's lives dramatically. So they don't understand the solution. And so a lot of them are, well, let's vote for Trump. Maybe he'll fix it. So they're thinking the government, just by re-electing someone else will fix the system, but it won't.
Stockholm syndrome. It's Stockholm syndrome. Let me ask you. Yeah. Because there will be listeners, and they'll have expected me and you now to be, going toe to toe. But let me just ask you this, right? And I will not get in your way. Explain to her, because you know what I've said in the past before. I say, look, I know you're sincere. I know you're very bright, and I know you mean what you mean. As I said already, sincerity. But if with all these free trade deals, like as you said, genuinely free trade deals, right, without all that corruption and all that nonsense, explain to our listeners who might be saying, well, what would happen then is our, companies within our countries would go outside of the country to buy what they need for the cheapest they can get it. And ultimately that's going to have an impact on people in their own country. This is, I know it's a time-honoured and probably a boring argument for you at this stage, Jeff, but give them the simple answer as to why they wouldn't have to worry about that.
Well, that's actually already happening. So that's pretty much why you can buy an iPad for $100. All those parts come from Asia. It's all actually put together in Asia. So it's already all happening. So I don't know what this person's really worried about. It's already all happening. The only thing is that under a free market system, there wouldn't be any taxes and regulations on top of it. So it'd be even cheaper. So it'd be much better. As far as, the jobs, this is a thing that people have to get their heads their mindset thing. This is, when they go to your government schools, your public indoctrination camps for 12 years, they never teach you to become an entrepreneur. And the reason is because they want you to be an employee, because then they got you in the tax system and then they can just drain you for the rest of your life. And that's what makes you actually poor. Most people wouldn't really need a full-time job if we didn't have big government and central banks. There'd be so much prosperity and wealth, but most of that's siphoned off. So people just are unaware that they've already been just completely impoverished and completely destroyed by the government and central banks. If we just remove that boot off of their neck, they won't even want a job, and everything would be so cheap, but everything would be like free to live pretty much, because everything would be so much cheaper without taxes and regulation and all these tariffs. So people just need to get their heads out of that. Like the person who tweeted in, I was promised a job for life, and then they replace me with robots. It's like, why would you ever want a job for life? That sounds like the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody. It's like, you got it all wrong. Like, we should just get rid of the governments and central banks, and then you just wouldn't have to work very much. If you want to work, go ahead, but you really wouldn't have to, because everything would be so cheap and so much, you just really wouldn't have much expenses. Your houses, you wouldn't have to pay property tax anymore because there'd be no government. If you did make money, you wouldn't have to pay an income tax. There'd no government, your actual money wouldn't actually go down in value every year because there'd be no central bank inflating it 5 to 10% a year, impoverishing you. You'd pretty much be pretty rich compared to how you are today if we just remove those things. But most people don't realize it because they go to their government indoctrination camps for 12 years. Then they go home and turn on their mainstream media fake news, and they tell them that the problem is we need the government to fix this and more government to fix that. We just need to get rid of the government and the central banks and we'll all be fine.
Well, listen, again, I see your point. I also see the point of the listener, because, and when I say I see your point, because you're right, the indoctrination camps, the schooling that we had. Look, we were told that you had to go to school, you had to finish it, and the purpose of that was to get a good job. We were all told that growing up, Jeff. We all had mothers and fathers saying, got to get a good job now, get a good steady job. And we all had that image of getting a job and being in a factory or being somewhere, and because our fathers did it, our grandfathers, they got the gold watch after 30 years. It was definitely ingrained in our thinking. Now, Lone Horse on Twitter says, Jeff, I don't understand how you can have capitalism without the state to protect the wealth of the rich. Now, I know you'll probably say you've answered that already, but if you want to just address that, how you can have capitalism without the state being there to protect the wealth of the rich? What do you say?
I don't know how the state protects the wealth of the rich right now. It mostly just takes their money. It takes 50% of their money every year from the wealthy. So I don't know why this person thinks the government needs to protect the wealth of the rich. And the other thing to point out is in a free market system, you wouldn't have these massively wealthy people. It'd be much more. Everyone would be much more closer together in terms of income. This is all created through the government system, through the incorporation system, which is also a part of government. It has nothing to do with free markets. Corporations are nothing to do with free markets. They're a contraption of the government and actually offers them protections. So maybe that's what this person is talking about, the protections that are afforded to corporations. But
governments, sorry to jump in, Jeff. Governments do privatise state assets and do sell them to private companies, don't they? It's one of the things they do.
Yeah, but I don't think that relates to the question.
No, maybe not. No, but it's something to bear in mind. I mean, central banks, of course, you and I have spoken about this. I think we agree. We've spoken about this before. Central banks, through organisations like the European Union, loaned money to governments, to bent and corrupt and filthy politicians, knowing those loans could never be repaid, to ultimately have a massive free-for-all grab, which we've seen now in Ireland, Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, for all the real wealth in those countries, which should belong to every man, woman and child in those countries, the water, the transport, the rail, the roads, all that sort of stuff. So maybe that's what he's getting at. That's one way that governments do protect the super rich. They basically sell them everything that's of any worth, maybe. What do you say?
Maybe, but I don't think the rails, the roads, and all that should be owned by every person either, every person who lives in a certain geographical region. But I'm just confused about the question because I don't see how, for example, if there was no government tomorrow, how would someone like Bill Gates lose all his money all of a sudden? I don't understand. This person, I don't understand the question. I don't think it's...
Yeah, I see where he's coming from. He's basically, and you and I have had this, we've had this out before, running out of time anyway, we've not got long to go. But that basically, without the protection of governments, of politicians, the super wealthy in society wouldn't be able to do what they do effectively, is what he's saying. And from previous
I agree with that. And that's a good thing,
I have a lot of sympathy with that. Well, it's going to be fascinating, Jeff, isn't it? The next 100 days, the next 6 months, because even though you and I agree and we know what's going to happen with this guy, I absolutely endorse what you said about this guy being off the reservation. I think they chose him because of his narcissism, because of his massively egotistical personality, and it could be very funny along the way, and I don't want to be in any way, insulting or disrespectful of people who might suffer under, these people and what these people do. But from the outside looking in, I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. Give us a quick plug again for Anarchapulco, Jeff.
Sure, yeah. I just mentioned that, it's going to be a fun few months and years ahead. seeing what Trump does for sure. It's going to be entertaining, and that's the best way to look at politics. If people want, just check out the Dollar Vigilante, dollarvigilante.com. We're also on YouTube. Just plug in Dollar Vigilante. And we also have our Dollar Vigilante Summit at the end of February 24th. And then February 25th to 28th is Narcopoco. It's the world's largest voluntariist gathering. As you mentioned, Richie, people like Max Egan and so many great people. Just freedom, people who just love freedom and want to see freedom brought into the world more and more, so we have more peace and prosperity.
These discussions are vital, Jeff, because I'm talking to a learned man whom I agree with a lot, and on some areas I don't agree with. We all want the same thing, Jeff. And that's the beauty of programs like this and of conferences like yours and what you're doing. We all want the same thing. Whether we disagree over the details, it's really not that important, because we want the removal of these criminals, these globalists, these central bankers. As a very start, at the very beginning, that's what we want. Fascinating again chatting with you. Really loved it. And I'll be in touch real soon, Jeff. Have a great conference in February. And as always, stay in touch with us.
Thank you, Richie.
Look after yourself. Jeff Berwick on the line to us there from Mexico. Check out anarchapulco.com. That's the conference, February 25th through February 28th. It'll be fascinating. Fascinating guy, interesting guy.